Hello everyone, thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Joseph Solis-Mullen. I'm a professor of history at Spring Arbor University. I am a political scientist and economist and research fellow at the Libertarian Institute. I've written a couple of books, one about China, Fake China Threat and Its Very Real Danger, as well as The National Debt and You, What It Is, How It Works and Why It Matters, both from the Libertarian Institute. I am running as the Libertarian candidate's nomination for Senate here in Michigan, and I thank you for joining me tonight for a talk on the topic of the war on drugs. Before I get started, it was recommended to me that I always start with something in the manner of a joke before I launch into these things, and because we're in Ann Arbor here, I thought this would be a good one. Ohio is a really excellent place. Okay. I love that my kids tell me this. I have 5 kids. The oldest one is in high school, and he tells me that, so he's part of Generation Alpha. He tells me that when kids think something is lame or terrible, the word they use to describe it is Ohio. If something is giving Ohio, it means it's terrible. So I think we have a lot of positive things coming down the pipeline from Gen Alpha. Okay. Take back Toledo. Okay. If I am elected, we will get Toledo back. Okay. So my topic here is the war on drugs.
I think that's a joke.
So, the war on drugs. So Nixon, of course, announces this very famously in 1971. This was actually a policy that had been begun under Lyndon B. Johnson, actually, in 1968, the last year of his presidency. And so Nixon was really inheriting a set of policies, a set of nascent policies that would gradually, over time, grow into the militarized, constitution-destroying disaster that we see today. Like every government initiative that's ever been started, it was, of course, all for our own good, and it has produced nothing but disastrous results. I'm not going to go through the entire history of the war on drugs, but essentially, what we have is a campaign beginning really in the 1880s to address the widespread use of opioids. Most of you are probably aware that things like Coca-Cola, Bayer, heroin and cocaine were medicinally used and were regularly available over the counter. And it was only gradually that the federal government began to start regulating these things. In the 30s, of course, you had the 30s and 40s, you had the crackdown on cannabis. And you have all of these things getting systematized and brought together under the aegis of a single governmental authority. And Nixon, while he did emphasize that there would be multiple prongs to the strategy, that it wouldn't just be cracking down on users and suppliers, that there should be an effort at rehabilitation, this very quickly goes by the wayside, as I think we all know. And by the time Ronald Reagan gets into office, Ronald Reagan does a lot of bad things, but he really pours money into this stuff. I mean, he increases the budget of the DEA, the FBI's narcotics unit. He brings the Pentagon in. George H.W. Bush encourages him to get the CIA involved to start attacking drug trafficking in Central and South America. This, of course, expands into a huge government program. Today, so far, since 1971, the war on drugs has cost $6 trillion. And that's in 2023 dollars, because if you Google or ask, it will tell you it's $1 trillion. That does not account for inflation. Actually, measured in today's dollars, it's $6 trillion is how much has been spent. But of course, very fewer people are using drugs, right? No, wrong. Almost twice as many people are using illegal narcotics. Surely they've become harder to get. Wrong. More widely available than ever. And they're cheaper, and their potency is greater. So like every government program, it's just a big, fat, expensive failure. Besides the cost, there's been mass incarceration. 1.5 million nonviolent drug offenders locked up at a cost, on average, nationwide, of $40,000 a year, again in 2023 dollars. Over $100 billion annually flows into the prison industry. We're talking about the state, private prisons, and all the contractors who are associated with running these services. Everything from laundry to communications to food. So it's a huge industry, it's a huge business. Apart from the monetary cost, which is clearly considerable, is the social cost. Think about 1.5 million families disrupted, torn apart, communities destroyed, torn apart, because of course, this led to the militarization of the police and a corresponding militarization of the gangs who controlled the drug traffic. The DEA, the organization that is primarily in charge, say that by their estimation, 90% of violent crime is drug-related. So literally, the war on drugs has created the crime that they now need more money to go and fight. This, of course, is no surprise to any of you. You're all good, smart libertarians. You know that this was a dumb policy. Civil asset forfeiture. This was something that was introduced. It allows law enforcement to seize property without charging you of any crime on the suspicion that that money, that car, that house, that property, whatever the case may be, might have somehow been related to some sort of illegal activity. Again, they don't need to prove it. They don't need to charge you with anything. And since the year 2000, various police agencies across the United States, in conjunction with their federal partners, have confiscated $70 billion from American citizens. $70 billion. And I actually did not adjust that number for inflation. I forgot to do that. So it's actually much higher. Now, the LP's position is very clear on this. This is a victimless crime. And there can't be a crime if there is no victim. Crime happens when the life, liberty, or property of one individual is trespassed by another individual or organization, such as the government. In this case, no one's life, liberty, or property has been harmed. The ill is society. But society cannot be a victim of a crime. Only individuals with property rights, with personal rights, can be the victim of a crime. So the idea, and this applies to things like prostitution as well. This again is another victimless crime. The LP position, therefore, is entirely consistent with protecting property rights, and it is also in alignment with the Libertarian Party's position that the government should be kept as small and limited as possible, eventually even gotten rid of and everything privatized. But it should be clear that a government whose stated aim is to combat drug trafficking in foreign countries, in our own country, to lock up those who use it, to surveil, to capture, to fight, that this is a government that is going to be very expensive and very constitution infringing. Now, of course, there are all sorts of potential social ills that go along with certain types of drug use, but there are lots of things that, while socially destructive, are not crimes. And we saw already how prohibition could run off the rails and easily produce negative externalities. And I don't know why it is that the example of the prohibition of alcohol in the late 19-teens, the early 1930s, was not all the example the American people needed to know that the war on drugs was always going to wind up the way that it was, creating very lucrative markets for black market actors to step into, and that attempts to fight them would lead to militarization, that the gangs themselves would militarize, that there would be incredible turf wars, to the point that now Mexico, large parts of Mexico, are totally ungoverned by the central government. They're in the hands of the cartels. A new president has actually been brought into office here a month and a half ago, but she says they're going to end the war on drugs. I'm just kidding. She says they're going to fight the cartels. Yeah. Which her predecessor tried. Actually, it wasn't AMLO who tried that. He tried to just kind of go along to get along. It was the guy before that. George W. Bush told him to do it. George W. Bush was an idiot. You all know that. So, of course, this is going to lead only to more violence, right? This is only going to lead to more violence. You hear calls in Congress today for the U.S. military to go fight the cartels in northern Mexico. When will they learn? They won't learn. They will never learn. Prohibition in the 1920s. So, what happens there? We make alcohol illegal, right? And people stop drinking alcohol. No, they don't. Of course they don't. Only now, the demand prompts entry, which any good free market economist can tell you, it prompts entry because there is a certain amount of profit to be made. And maybe initially the cost is, a nickel a bottle. And that's too low. Could go to prison, could get shot. Dangerous business. And so the price gets bid up to the point where where people enter the market to provide. And this is exactly what happened. And of course, because it's illegal activity, gangs become involved. It's a lucrative business for gangs to be involved in now. And this is one of the things that led to the rise of the mafia in the United States, of course, and to organized crime. And what really undercut them? It was making alcohol legal again. It took away their revenue source. So why legalization of drugs, which has been happening in some states, but very slowly, very piecemeal, and it's operating very much in a legal gray zone because at any moment the federal government could decide to come down hard on them. I think most of you remember Jeff Sessions, Donald Trump's first attorney general, said that he was going to come down hard on him. He eventually wound up getting canned by Trump for something else, but hopefully we don't see a repeat of that. But really, it's just a policy of benign neglect by the federal government that prevents them from cracking down on states like Washington or Oregon or even Michigan, which of course has had legalized cannabis now for some years. Of course, with no rise in crime. In fact, if anything, it's just boosted the government's tax receipts, which you'd think the government would be all for, right? Because people are going to use them anyway. And I remember watching a debate. People are always curious how I became a libertarian. It was Ron Paul, really. I mean, it was Ron Paul, it was Ludwig von Mises, it was all this confluence of things happening around 2007, 2008, 2009, right as I was graduating from high school, going into college. And of course, there was YouTube. So Ron Paul, this debate back in the 1980s, where people are, harassing him for saying that drugs should all be legalized. And he just says, look, if heroin is legal tomorrow, none of you out here in the audience are going to do heroin tomorrow. But the people who are going to do heroin anyway are going to do it whether it's legal or not. And it's going to be far less socially destructive if it's legal. If we remove the stigma and the criminal element away from it. It's going to disempower gangs. It's actually going to lead to better medical outcomes. We've seen this in the handful of European countries who have taken a much more hands-off approach to drug policy. It makes perfect sense, but again, I'll just go back to this. It is a $100 billion a year industry. $100 billion a year. People will do some awful things for $100 billion, including lock up people for nonviolent drug offenses. I mean, this is the majority of people who are locked up. So, as a Libertarian Party, we can obviously lead on this issue, and we do have natural allies in our fight against the government on this matter. And I think Andrew and I have talked about this. Issue coalitions. Look, Democratic Socialists and whatnot are never going to be party members, nor should they be invited to be party members. However, on an issue-by-issue basis, we should obviously work with those who have similar policy goals to ourselves. And this is one where we should very much put aside any other differences, any other complaints. We probably overlap as well here, a little bit on foreign policy as well, but to make the effort to do some good things, especially at the local level. Because it's pretty clear that the federal government at this point is going to take a rather hands-off approach to some of these things, and the state government is very interested in more revenue. I think there's a lot of very promising avenues that we could go here. So I did want to tie in China to this because, of course, the big one that's in the news now is fentanyl. Is fentanyl, right? Synthetic opioid. Okay. So going back to the 1990s, Purdue Pharma produced a drug called Oxycontin. I'm sure all of you are aware of this story now. There was a very nasty incentive structure that was set up, and they basically just churned out millions and millions of pills and got a lot of people hooked on opioids. And there's been an investigation now. I believe Purdue Pharma has been sued. Yeah, they tried to file for some kind of bankruptcy protection. They made a movie, I believe, about it, didn't they?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Like Michael Keaton.
Michael Keaton, that's who it is. Yes, Michael Keaton in it. So that's all very well known. But of course, this led to an interest in substitutes, right? Because as the supply started to get restricted, these opioid addicts did not stop using opioids. They just turned to doing heroin and then turned to doing the even cheaper and more potent fentanyl. And if you read the news, you'll hear that China is devilishly trying to hook us all on fentanyl and kill us. This, of course, there's always a grain of truth to these things. So what's happening is it's a synthetic drug. That means it's made out of precursor chemicals, right? So the chemicals have to come from somewhere, and then they have to be processed into the drug itself. The drug is being processed in places like Mexico and Canada, and the precursor chemicals are coming from India and China. Actually, the majority of them are coming from India, but because Washington doesn't view India as a threat, they view China as a threat, and they view India as a potential helping hand in fighting China. They just never mention the fact that India is the largest producer of these precursor components. They simply talk about China. So, is there a lot of fentanyl? Yes, but efforts to crack down on it have only led to worse outcomes. You've probably heard the horror stories of the police officer who opens up the bag on the highway, the powder flies in the air, he inhales it, and he dies because the fentanyl is so concentrated. What's happening here is they're trying to make it into smaller and smaller packages, concentrating the dosages to try and get it through the enhanced efforts of the government to intercept these drugs. So again, you have an attempt by the government to regulate this. Instead of it achieving something that is a desired outcome from the government's perspective, it is in fact leading to even worse outcomes and changing absolutely nothing. So, individual people are going to be able to make the decisions about what are best for them. Allowing more information onto the market. Again, if something is illegal, you are obviously going to experience large amounts of information asymmetries. You want transparency, you want an open market. There are only a few ways, there are 3 ways really, that I've been able to think of for goods and services to be procured across the marketplace. The first is a market, where we all just compete for what we want and try and make the best decisions we can with the most information that we can. The other is the government chooses. And the third one is we just randomly do it. Everyone just gets something random. So obviously, given these 3 options, the market is best. The market is the best. Allowing individuals the maximum amount of opportunity to choose for themselves, to own themselves, to control their lives, it is morally justified, it is the libertarian position, and it is also, as it turns out, the most practical and most optimal outcome that we can hope for. So, because it's been the news and because the election is coming soon, I would like to carry on talking about China just for a couple of more minutes, because recently there have been more drills off the coast of Taiwan. Look, it's no secret that foreign policy is one of the areas that the Senate spends a preponderant amount of time on. It's one of the few areas that they spend any amount of time on, really. As I'm running for Senate, I'm going to then speak to what has become everyone's favorite whipping boy, whether you are a Democrat or a Republican, and that is China. Look, there's always going to, if you want to justify having the defense budget that we have, if you want to justify having the security, police state, the surveillance state that we have, you're going to need to justify it. All of these departments are their own little fiefdom inside of the government. I remember when I was doing a budgetary analysis and I was talking to someone in one of the departments, and I said, so like what are the odds you'll produce a budget surplus this year? And he said, none, 0. I said, you're sure you never produce one? He said, no, we would never do that. If it got to the last day of if it got to the last day of the fiscal year and we had money left over, we would spend it all on anything that we could come up with. Otherwise, our budget's going to get cut next year. No, if anything, we would try and spend every dime that we had and say, we're so desperate, we need more money. And of course, if you want to ask for more money, you need to have a reason, right? You need to have a reason to ask for more money. And China is the perfect excuse to ask for anything and everything. Haven't you heard? They're stealing all our land, all our jobs, all our technology. They're spying on us with weather balloons, maybe full of anthrax. I don't know. Someone said it on the internet. I don't know. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's bull. Look, I get it. On a map, China is large, and it would not be wise for the United States government to continue to try and meddle in affairs that are right off of China's coast. This is not 1994 anymore. The relative power of the United States, and I should start saying Washington, because we are all colonial subjects of Washington. There is supposed to be a relatively co-equal relationship between the states and the federal government, but I don't think anyone in this room is confused about the actual relationship. Washington holds the purse strings. Washington has the resources, military and otherwise. They're the ones in the driver's seat, if you will. They are the metropole. We are the colonies. We're privileged colonies because we're close. right? But they would militarily occupy us in a heartbeat if they thought they needed to. And in fact, I've heard those ideas floated more than once in my lifetime. So let's not be confused at all about what the federal government exists for and what that army exists for. That army exists, number one, to go find things to do so that the military contractors in the Pentagon can keep getting paid. But at the end of the day, that army will probably be turned on the citizens of the United States if Washington ever sees a reason to do so again. It already has once. It's one of the many reasons that we should always oppose a standing army. I don't think the Navy's going to occupy us, right? It's not as though I object to us having a Navy or even an Air Force. But for God's sake, what's up with the F-35, right? Come on. Someone told me the other day, we need to audit the Pentagon. I said, what's the point? They fail every audit. There's no point. We need to bulldoze the Pentagon, maybe. Yeah. Audit. So we need to audit the Federal Reserve. It's like, why? They fail every audit anyway and nothing changes. We need to end the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
So, yes. Look, I will not pretend that we are going to be able to win major elections, change policy overnight, but I really do think that if we can stimulate local interest on the topics that matter to people, make those kind of issue coalitions, focus on local races that we might be able to win, increase party membership, that maybe in the long term we can build up the kind of party infrastructure and fundraising bases that we need to be able to compete in elections. I think that it is beyond doubt that people are getting fed up. They continue to vote for Republicans and Democrats because that is the logic of the two-party system. They're afraid of quote-unquote wasting their vote. But let's be clear, we're not stealing anyone's votes. There are millions of people in Michigan who are going to sit at home and not vote on election day. People who are completely disillusioned with politics. Republican and Democratic voters are going to vote for their candidates. They're not libertarians who just don't know it yet. They are slaves of their party. They love the state. They only wish the state could be used against their opponents. That's it. And that's not us. Again, that's why it's okay to make issue coalitions, but we're never going to see eye to eye on the final ends and ideology. We're just never going to see it that way. And so we need to make our own third way. We should support initiatives, ballot initiatives. We should support nullification. We should support efforts to get ranked choice voting done, proportional representation, things that will really structurally level the playing field. Because it's clear that the duopoly is losing its legitimacy. People are alienated. People are fed up. But the structure is very much set against us. And of course, we all know, though, that Republicans and Democrats will work together to exclude us. We've seen this in the debates. We've seen this in efforts where, in the Northeast there, in Vermont, when they finally did get ranked choice voting passed, the Republicans and Democrats teamed up to destroy it, right? And so they had to get it back on there again, and they tried to boot it off again. So they will get together on that. Yes. The Libertarian Party. It is vital. It is vital. We should keep doing what we're doing. We should not compromise. We should be willing to work together with others on issues where it does not compromise our own ideology, but we should stay pure and true to who we are. Thank you.